morning, everyone. It's my pleasure today to introduce Professor Jim Neel, who will be, as you can see, speaking about echoes along the Syrian border, family archaeology, and the sound of distant gunfire. Professor Neel has been on the art faculty here at BSC since 2002, and he has served variously as the chair of the art department and director of the Durban Gallery. Professor Neel was chair of the Visual Arts Department at the Alabama School of Fine Arts before he came to BSC. He received a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Birmingham Southern College and a Master of Fine Arts degree in sculpture from the University of Alabama. Some of Professor Neel's areas of interest include sculpture, drawing, photojournalism, and Latin America. And he is going to be speaking some about his exhibit in the Durban Gallery, I imagine, today. And for those of you who haven't seen it, I would like to highly encourage you to go visit the exhibit. So with no further ado, Professor Neel.
All right, thank you so much, Provost Sarah. I really appreciate that. So first of all, I'd just like to thank some folks right up front. You know, it takes a village to make an artist. This is kind of a list of my village. It's very, it's actually not the whole village, I don't think, but John Michael Kohler Art Center, their residency program, the Kohler Company itself, the Faculty Development Committee here, and the Faculty Sabbatical Program that allowed me to take some time off in January and the spring, and to work on the work, and of course the Office of the Provost. And my family in the Department of Art and Art History, the faculty and the students. I couldn't have done the work that I did without the help of an awful lot of people in the factory at the Kohler Company. And none of it would have probably happened without this wonderful woman that started the program, the art program there, Ruth Kohler. I also like to thank the Huntsville Museum, University of Alabama, Sarah Moody Art Gallery, and the Sloss Furnace Mill Arts programs for their support and some of the work we have here. And then, of course, my family, my wife, my son, my daughter, my mother, and my old friend Dennis Covington, and a student, Brooke Aiken, all who really contributed an awful lot to this and allowed me to do the work that I do. In the summer of 2014, I lived for a month along the Turkish-Syrian border. You fly to Istanbul, stand in line with two young men, one American, the other European, who are headed south to join up. Then you take a 3-hour flight on what everybody refers to as the Jihadi Express to Hatay, and the city the New Testament calls Antioch. That city, modern-day Antakya, is your home base. There you rent a room, a monk cell, from Father Domenico Bertogli at the Catholic Church. Located on the ancient Roman road, the restored church is mere feet from the minaret of a small mosque, a stone's throw from the large mosque, a short walk from the evangelical church, mere blocks from a Jewish mosque. From a Jewish synagogue, and a short walk from the car rental office located between an army surplus store who insists it only sells to FSA fighters, and a hotel where Daesh or ISIS fighters taking R&R hang out the windows in the summer heat. The streets are a warren of alleyways that lead to the city center and the roundabout. To the roundabout where the streets are filled with tourists, Sunni refugees in hijab, street vendors selling fresh rosemary, date-filled mamoul, bright red soccer jerseys of the local team. Journalists hang out together at the Al Sut restaurant overlooking the Orontes River. And the alleyways lead to the neighborhood cafe, started by young poets and musicians and actors, free Wi-Fi, cheap eats. You're a regular here on the rooftop of Yusef's place. Like some cultural road cut through geological eons, modern Antakya is a place of layers: physical, political, historical, cultural, and spiritual. It is astonishingly beautiful, this city on the Orontes, an oasis really, displaced from the real world, yet seemingly at the very center, surrounded both geographically and philosophically by the mayhem that lies just 30 miles away in Syria. The Asia, hotel, dance club on the second floor, and open patio bar on the cafe on its rooftop. It is best most days at dusk when sitting in one of the discreet areas of couches and chairs. You're immersed in the sounds and intrigue of the ancient city and the modern world. On the hill to the southeast, silhouetted against the sky, are the ruins of an 11th century Crusader fortress and the stone cave church of St. Peter, founded by the Christian apostle in the 1st century. In the opposite direction, the contemporary music and laughter of a wedding party spills across the street through open windows, where it clashes with the evening call to prayer broadcast from the speakers atop the minaret of Antakya's largest mosque. Below there is the chaotic sound of the traffic and car horns, and above, in the sky that turns magenta in the setting sun, the high-pitched whistle of ever-present barn swallows rises above it all as they swoop and dive through the patio and the surrounding streets and alleyways that follow the path of Alexander the Great and Diocletian's Roman soldiers. The evening air is cool in May. I wear a leather jacket and a kufiya, and you wrap your shoulders in one of the blankets that the cafe supplies. We sit on leather couches in one of the comfortable conversation areas, drinking Efes Pilsners and hot Turkish chai, and share meds supplied by runners from the restaurant down the main avenue. Ours is only one of several groups spread out across the patio. We are 5 to begin with: 3 young Syrian refugees, a musician, a dancer, and a former Syrian tank commander who went AWOL when he was ordered to attack FSA positions within his native city of Idlib. They have become poets and puppeteers and fundraiser to bring art and music and theater to Syrian refugee children in and out of the camps. We don't know them well yet, just names only. They are suspicious of us and we are cautious of them. That would change over the weeks to come, but for tonight it is the wise thing to keep things close. People disappear from this city when they trust the wrong people. We're joined by a European woman we met at the Lewan Hotel. She claims to be a German geographer from Bavaria, working for NGOs. Her English, Turkish, and Arabic are perfect. But I know Bavaria better than she. She's a spook. A Russian intelligence, probably. She's so clearly a spy that I begin a game of asking her questions out of natural order to see if I can catch a mistake, but I'm outmatched. And when the next day, outside the Baruti, a favorite bar of affluent young Turks and journalists, she introduces us to her Spanish friend as Boris, I can't help myself and ask her if she's sure her name isn't Natasha. Of course, the staff at the Lewan tells us everyone thinks we are CIA. On the Asia patio, there's an unspoken protocol of strategic distances between tables. Just far enough away from us is a table of young hipster Turks, severe haircuts that are the fashion of the day, sharing aromatic hookah, laughing, self-absorbed in the night. Deep in the north corner are 2 men, Ivy League clothes and attitude. They're smoking Gauloise, holding them in cupped hands against the breeze that occasionally carries the French they're speaking. Their backs are always turned to the rest of us, CIA, British intelligence. Directly behind us is a group growing in number of NGO workers. The energetic British woman in charge of Save the Children for the area comes over to introduce herself to us, and there's not a suspicious bone there. Facing me across the room, an East European is angered when he thinks I've pointed my camera towards him. We make plans to meet again in another public place, and my friend and I leave and head to the Baruti. We go there to meet Sophie Cousins, a young Australian freelance journalist who focuses on health issues. She's there with her Syrian fixer. She's phoned to say that she has just returned from a 3-day visit to Halep, or Aleppo, with Médecins Sans Frontières. We find the two of them sitting in an out-of-the-way corner of the ground floor near the fireplace. They've had quite a lot to drink, but it's understandable. On the nighttime return trip, she tells us their van was fired upon and narrowly missed by an RPG rocket. The adrenaline exuding from her is palpable, and I understand. I can still remember the same feeling from my days in El Salvador. She has a life ahead of PTSD and flashbacks. But for now, here in this city of layers and intrigue, this city that appears so insulated from the horrors that exist minutes away, we're just happy she's alive. It's only a short walk from the Yalandagi refugee camp to the public park where the 5 of us sit around a small round table under evergreen trees and watchful eyes of Turkish military soldiers drinking Coca-Cola and chai. Our fixer, Assad Seo, has brought 2 middle-aged Syrian men out of the refugee camp to meet us. The 2 of them smoke American cigarettes one after another, but since they don't speak English, Assad must translate almost all of what they say. The 2 men are former FSA fighters from Latakia, who fled to Turkey with their families and now live in the tents surrounded by concertina, razor wire, and strictly guarded by Turkish security. The Syrian refugees are free to leave and return to the camp as they will, but getting in as an American freelance photographer is proving impossible. The men share several war stories with us and their views, shared by almost every Syrian we speak with, that the U.S. has abandoned them in their revolution. But at some point, when everyone seems more relaxed with each other, the older one says, "I can get you in. There should be no problem. Many of my men are there, and they will protect you." I glance at my companions and smile and begin putting lenses back in my bag. This is what we are hoping to get at last inside the refugee camp. But a couple of minutes later, we realize he means he would take us into Syria, not the camp. And all the while he's telling us how he will keep us safe, we can hear the regime rocket attacks and telltale thump of mortar fire on those same FSA positions just over the hill. Thanks all the same. Peter Curtis, an American writer from Boston, fluent in Arabic, had disappeared from Antakya 2 years earlier after hearing the same promises. A Jabhat al-Nusra group would release him later that summer after a back-channel ransom was paid for his release. You see, kidnapping Westerners for ransom is big business. The latest estimate I have is that Al-Qaeda has raised something like $150 million from ransoms, mostly paid by European governments. So now the practice has just become part of the border economy. I've done some crazy things in my life. I firmly believe that risk is a necessary component to art, but I'm not suicidal, and I'm not suicidal. I don't have a death wish. But instead, we leave and visit, instead we visit Orwa, a visual artist and political activist living outside the camp in a small house with his wife, and then head back to the center of town. Orwa and his wife now live in Vienna, Austria. I took this picture from the rooftop of the house where Mustafa, a former Free Syrian army fighter, lives with his wife and 2 children. It's located in the center of Yalandagi, just 2 kilometers from the Syrian border. In the center, there, the tall mountain there, is Kilich Dagi, the volcano where the Hittites believed the gods of lightning and thunder lived. In the ancient world, it was visited at different times by Alexander the Great and the Roman Emperor Hadrian. On the left, way over there on the left in the background, is the Syrian town of Kasab. As we stood there, we could hear the concussive sounds of artillery as Free Syrian army fighters battled the government forces of Bashar al-Assad. It's just there, over Kasab, on 24th November of last year, that our Russian Su-24 fell from the sky after being shot down by American-built Turkish F-16 fighters. I wonder if Mustafa and his family watched from their roof. That's Latakia over there, the home province of Bashar. Well, as 2 kids, you watch cartoons and run around the house. We visit and share chai with him and one of his comrades in arms, who's heavily scarred and still recovering from his battle wounds. We're invited to share a meal with them. And although I'm concerned about the cost to them, we are guests in their home, and to refuse would be an insults. But I'm also disturbed by the custom. They are Sunni, and the woman, his wife, who has cooked the wonderful traditional meal that we share on the living room floor, is not allowed to join us. The 5-year-old boy, yes, but his mother and sister, no. That's Mustafa and his son. In 1274 BCE, just south of Kasab, near the city of Homs, the armies of the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II met the army of Hittite king Mutali II and his ally, the king of Aleppo, in the Battle of Kadesh. In the end, both sides went home claiming victory, and though it was actually a draw, what we have is the first instance of a written treaty between nations. This is a land that has been desired by despots throughout history. It's real, it's not real. Well, it's real, and it's here now, and we're causing it and already suffering from its consequences. Not sometime in the future, now. Now, we make movies about great climatic disasters. We envision glaciers and polar ice caps melting. But let's take a look at a map. We need to go back. So let's take a look at a map. 10 years ago, a temperature increase in a band that circles the globe caused drought conditions in several countries. In the U.S., farms and cattle ranches and water-reserved lakes in central and northern Texas began drying up. As farms failed, related businesses failed, people moved out, moved on, left their farms, shopping centers, their houses, mortgages behind, empty and unpaid. According to a 2015 U.S. Department of Defense report, global warming is now the greatest long-term threat to our national security. Halfway around the world in Syria, according to a 2010 UN report, 3 million people whose agricultural livelihoods were devastated were reduced to extreme poverty. Seeking refuge and jobs, many of them moved to the cities of Aleppo, Homs, and Damascus. Encouraged by the seeming success of other Middle Eastern nations, the social uprisings referred to as the Arab Spring, Syrian students and civilians took to the streets in peaceful protest, imploring the government to address the growing economic and humanitarian crisis and calling for democratic reforms. Bashar answered with anti-government teenage graffiti with troops and tanks, midnight arrests, and torture. That humanitarian crisis has grown to be the largest in history. Were the fighting to end tomorrow, the crisis would continue for generations. 1 out of every 8 Syrians is displaced. The infrastructure of its cities mostly destroyed. There's no place for refugees to return. Jabhat al-Nusra and Daesh, and now Putin's Russian military and Iran have stepped into the power vacuum controlled vast areas of Syria and Iraq. This time it's not just some oil fields that are at stake here. Humanity itself is in the balance. My young Syrian friends are in Germany and Austria and Scotland. They are part of the refugee population that has fueled the growing power of the knee-jerk far right in the UK and France and the US. The xenophobia and authoritarianism of the earliest 20th century has returned and has risen. So this is Göbekli Tepe. In modern Turkish, it means the pot-bellied hill. It's the center of the universe. It's the alpha of our concept of the other. The prominence sits halfway between the Tigris River to the east and the Euphrates River to the west. It's only half natural. The bottom half is stone bedrock. The upper half is entirely man-made. Man-made 11,600 years ago. That's 8,000 years before Stonehenge. That's 6,000 years before the Great Pyramids of Giza. It may be the world's first temple. Göbekli Tepe was built by nomadic Neolithic people who would, over the next 2,000 years, domesticate wheat and cattle, inventing agriculture and animal husbandry, and then construct the world's first permanent dwellings and cities. It is, according to Klaus Schmidt, the German archaeologist who spent the last years of his life excavating the site, the place where humankind separated itself from the rest of nature, and where we first celebrate our dominion over the universe. It's the place we started on the road to the other, headlong towards that omega. Let me show you. When you stand at the top of Göbekli Tepe, you see this. The Anatolian Plain, the Fertile Crescent, stretching out in every direction for 200 kilometers. To the west are the Euphrates, Gaziantep, Adana, and the hazy Taurus Mountains. To the east are Mardin, the Tigris, and the steppes of Kurdish Turkey. To the north, the volcano Karak Dag, the giant stone heads of Nemrut, and the Black Sea. And to the south, across the Haran Plain, lies Syria. 30 minutes away from the ancient site is a border crossing, an official gateway into Syria, the ancient land that today is the most dangerous place on the planet. It is the most dangerous place to be a journalist. More than 95 have been killed during the current conflict. More than 36 kidnapped, disappeared, or murdered. It is the most dangerous place to be a Syrian citizen who's politically or religiously opposed to the ruling party of President Bashar Assad or the group Daesh, or just in the way. Syria's national wealth, infrastructure, and institutions have been almost obliterated by the catastrophic impact of nearly 5 years of conflict. Fatalities caused by the war directly and indirectly amount to 470,000, according to the Syrian Center for Policy Research. A far higher total than the figure of 250,000 by the United Nations. That was until they stopped collecting statistics. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, which manages conflict death tolls, stopped counting Syria's dead in mid-2014, citing lack of access and diminishing confidence in the data resources. Of that 470,000 war dead counted by the CPR, about 400,000 were directly due to violence, while the remaining 70,000 fell victim to the lack of adequate health services, medicine, especially for chronic diseases, lack of food, clean water, sanitation, and proper housing, especially for those displaced within the conflict zones. About 13.8 million Syrians have lost their source of livelihood. The shrinking of the population by 21% helps explain the wave of refugees reaching Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, and Europe. In all, 45% of the population has been displaced, 6.36 million internally and more than 4 million abroad. Health, education, and income standards have all deteriorated. Of course, poverty increased by 85% in 2015 alone. In all, 11.5% of the country's population have been killed or injured since the crisis erupted in March 2011. That's basically 1 out of 10, right? That would be 132,000 people in the greater Birmingham area. The number of wounded is put at 1.9 million. Life expectancy has dropped from 70 in 2010 to 55 in 2015. Overall, economic losses are estimated at least $255 billion. But the real numbers may be even higher. There are very few people left there to report the regime, and the regime frequently posts signs in Aleppo reading, "Surrender or starve." And it's the most dangerous place on earth to be a child. Since the conflict began, more than 100,000 Syrian children have died, 1 every 5 minutes. And countless have been injured and maimed. They make up half the refugees. Let me introduce you to 3 of them I met at a hospital in the Turkish border town of Hanli. There are no real hospitals left in northern Syria. There's not a single pediatrician left there either. This is Saddam. He's 5 years old. But Saddam was home with his family when a barrel bomb dropped by a government helicopter exploded in his neighborhood. His parents were killed. He survived, but he'll never walk again. Shrapnel severed his spinal column. And this is Ashraf. Ashraf is 13. A rocket fired from regime aircraft exploded in the street where he and his buddies were playing soccer. You can see a few of his wounds in this picture. He's a shy and a quiet boy, but then it's been only a month since his injuries, and I didn't really know what he was like before the burning hot metal altered his body and his life, his future. And this is Asra. She's 8 years old, from Halab, from Aleppo. When shrapnel from a barrel bomb ignited the fuel oil tank on the roof of her home, she was burned extensively on her torso and arms and legs and face. Some 4 months later, she was not completely healed, but you can see that smile. The hospital wouldn't let me take her with me when I left. So they're the reason I make art. Susan Sontag, writing on Virginia Woolf's 3 Guineas, says that we are not monsters, we members of the educated class. Our failure to look at the images of war and see that war tears, rends, rips open, eviscerates, scorches, dismembers, ruins, and to not strive to abolish war is not the act of moral monsters, but a failure of imagination. It is a failure to imagine the pain of others and to feel more than a moment's revulsion, but to feel true empathy. There are other reasons, of course, that are deeper, fundamental, and would drive me even if the world were at peace. I think maybe what I am at heart is just a storyteller. It could be because of my deep Norse, Beowulf genetics, or just because I'm a Southerner. You know, we spin tales as part of our geographical DNA. We're born into an oral history and an oral culture. It's the reason it's impossible to examine the history of American lit without talking about Fitzgerald, Welty, Capote, Faulkner, Toole, McCullers, Percy. When I make art like Scars, I get to tell a story each time it's exhibited. For me, that's an honor. But it's also a requirement, an imperative. My friend James Baldwin said that words like freedom, justice, and democracy are not common concepts. On the contrary, they're rare. People are not born knowing what these are. It takes enormous and above all individual effort to arrive at the respect for other people that those words imply. And so as an artist and a citizen of this planet, I'm compelled by that very nature of the cultural responsibility to speak out in the voice that I have at my disposal. In my case, it's a visual voice. As an artist, I struggle with the inadequacy of what I do. You know, I'm not a great orator. I'm not a figure of celebrity with millions for my audience. I don't have a super PAC funding me. The NRA and the Kochs are certainly not going to throw buku dollars my way, and I govern no one. Most of the time, I seem to be either a voice in the wilderness or I'm standing on the wrong side of the pulpit preaching to the choir. But whatever that role is, whatever part society grants me in the cultural discourse, I have no choice in the matter. You know, no more than I can choose to breathe or eat or drink. You know, James Cameron puts it, you know, artists are sharks. We move forward or we die. You know, the phrase these days is studio practice. I was asked at a museum function in Wisconsin to describe my studio practice, and before I could think better of it, I clicked back that in my studio I don't practice, that at my age, if I didn't know what I was doing by now, no matter if practice was going to help. I apologized. And then tried to explain how I do work, the methodology, if you will, that I employ to make objects that I make. That's not always easy, of course, because I don't always understand or am conscious of how it all goes down myself. You know, recently, Lynn and I were at the Huntsville Museum for the opening of Dustin Farnsworth's exhibition, and someone asked him the question that's always asked of us, how long did it take you to make that? And Dustin was polite and said something like, I worked 12 to 14 hours a day for 3 months on that one. But what I really wanted him to answer was what Bob Tucker used to answer, a lifetime. It took me a lifetime to make that one. You know, when I was a kid, it's me in the middle. When I was a kid, this was my world. Apartheid and Jim Crow. Water hoses and dogs. Bridges and billy clubs. Demagogues and premiers. Short wars and cold wars. Hot wars and long wars. Bombs and the bomb. Rock and Little Rock. Cover and shelter. But something seems to happen to folks when they hit their 30s. You know, a carpenter decides to reform an ancient religion. You convince someone to bankroll your voyages into the unknown West. You take up arms against your brothers. Maybe you move from Paris to Martinique or Orles with your paints. You discover new elements. You fly solo across the Atlantic. You sit on top of a rocket and travel to the moon and back. You are at the vanguard of the movement to liberate half of the population from entrenched sexism. Or you stand in the nation's capital and challenge an entire world to follow your dream. Now, in my 30s, I was not that ambitious. I lived, illegally, downtown in a 3,000 square foot storefront. I taught art by day and made art and theater by night, and applied to be the first artist to fly on the space shuttle and orbit the Earth. But then one summer, I met the woman I would marry 1 week, and the next week packed a bag and lots of film, and with an old friend headed to war-torn Central America for art. If I was going to make art about war or reason, I needed to experience it firsthand. How could I speak truthfully about something I knew only from the accounts of others? Write what you know. Thanks, Mr. Twain. And the closest war was El Salvador. And since that first trip, this has been my studio practice. Go to the borders. The border of reason and belief. The border of tolerance and intolerance. The border of love and hate. The border of life and death. Risk and danger are the catalysts of life. Invest your heart and mind. You are a witness. Take photographs, make friends, absorb the colors, the smells, the tastes, the sounds. Understanding is your goal. So 3, write. First in some sort of journal, then memoir, maybe then fiction, maybe obsessively draw about it, automatically, just let synapses form. Allow the story to emerge, keep moving forward. Do not plan anything. Don't succumb to impatience and try and force the ideas. Sometimes the sun comes out in the middle of the bleakest winter. Make something. So two-dimensional first. First using those pictures that you took, but create a new world with them. One that is personal, that's true. Visual fiction. Anais Nin said that had I not created my own world, I would certainly have died in other people's. Which I said that first. And now make some objects, right? You're ready. You won't even really have to think about it. The ideas are ready. Or as Ernest Hemingway said, create people, not characters, not caricatures. But sometimes it snows in April. So be prepared to change. Be open to it. Evolution's not a planned mechanism. It's not even logical. It happens by accident. So make sure that you're prepared for it. Make sure that yes is in your vocabulary. In 2008, in 2008 and then in 2010, I received an arts industry residency at the Kohler Company in Kohler, Wisconsin. A collaboration between the John Michael Kohler Art Center, a small diamond of a museum in Sheboygan on the shores of Lake Michigan, and the Kohler Company, a family-owned plumbing manufacturer a couple of miles away in the community, created for its Austrian-German immigrant workers in 1900 by the company's founder. The residency program, now some 40 years old, is competitive, 350 to 500 applicants. Each year vie for 12 to 18 places in the pottery where the company makes sinks and toilets, and the foundry where the union workers cast iron in brass tubs and boxcar wheels. Those two trips were to work on and complete an installation entitled Babel. For 4 months they supplied me with travel expenses, a place to live, a stipend, 24 hours to access to the factory, all the materials I could use, and all the expertise I required. And then in 2011, the Kohler Foundation purchased Babel and gifted it to the permanent collection of the Arts Center. So this was the proposal for 2016. Archaeological fragments use the trope of archaeology to call attention to the plight of children in areas of conflict, to address not only their loss of life and limb, but the theft of their childhood and innocence. Objects of childhood, toys, things that are collected, carried in pockets and stashed in dresser drawers, caressed and treasured, stand in for the children themselves. Enlarged to the scale of kindergarteners, the objects are ancient toys from prehistoric Syria. But But this was before my mother died. Mom was born in Havana, a small town in Hale County, Alabama, during the Depression. I've searched through all the WPA photographs I can find, hoping to see her face among images of Lang or Evans, but to no avail. And growing up during those hard times and spending her high school years under World War II rationing, though, is probably the reason why she always had 2 of everything in the pantry and selectively kept all the things that were important to her. Like an old, yellowed with age shoebox full of my baby and toddler shoes that I found squirreled away at the bottom of her closet, or her own mother's doll, carefully wrapped and sleeping in the bottom of her cedar chest, made about 1903. Yeah, you are my sunshine, my only sunshine, she would sing to us. And sometimes that sun comes out in the dead of winter and brings warmth and light. So I stored my grief and packed all the shoes and dolls and loaded them in the SUV along with new winter gear and the survival kit I had assembled for college years in Maine, and drove north through the worst winter storm of the year. By the time I reached Kohler, my original proposal had changed. Other than just trying to stay alive, there's not much to do between Birmingham and Sheboygan. But live in your head, and allow your mind's eye to see through the driving snow and beyond the loneliness. So I let those ideas grow, pruned back some of those branches. The field of objects of ancient history would go fallow, and a new field was planted with my personal artifacts and my own archaeology. I see concomitant as a true collaboration with my family, the 2 women who raised me, and my wife, a sculptor of beautiful glass works, my archaeologist daughter and her 3 red-headed children, my son, an actor and dancer, my oldest friend with whom I've dodged bullets, and my student who casts iron, and the men and the women of Kohler. Almost everything we know about the history of our species comes to us from fragments. A piece of jawbone with some teeth that identifies a new species of hominid. A bit of clay tablet accounting with the first recorded proper name. The broken remains of a stone temple that predates agriculture and cities, a crumbling piece of papyrus that calls into question the very foundation of a religion. In the work for the last few years, I've used the trope of archaeology as a filter for the images that I create. Things are presented as broken, pieced together from shards, the historical remains of our future. They are the questions I need answered. What is it we are leaving behind? Fragmented lives, fragmented cultures, fragmented children. How will future cultures view us when they unearth the mass graves at Shiloh and Gettysburg or Normandy, or unearth the rubble of Aleppo? Will they view us in the same light we too often see our fellows, as less than, primitive, the other? Will they see us as just an early dead-end evolution, step in evolution, a species incapable of getting beyond its amygdala-driven existence. Will they shake their heads when they discover the evidence of the carnage that we wrought in the name of religious, millennial-old mythologies taken literally? I try to pose these questions with concomitant. I use the images of my own family and those of my friends to help me sort it all out, all the while hoping that we can wake up in time to save our children and our grandchildren, because I want to see a world where peace is not just a word, but the universal state of being. So thank you all for coming today. And as they say in the Middle East, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. Thank you. So I suppose that there's some time for some questions, maybe, if anybody has any. I'm not sure I can answer them, but I'll sort of give you a shot. Or, no, that's okay. I would invite you to, if you have not seen it, please go next door to the art building, to the gallery, and see the exhibition. There's, like I said, there's collaborative work in there, that I collaborated with my wife, with my daughter, with my son, who did the amazing soundscape in there that really sets the tone for the whole piece. Brooke Aiken, one of my students, and like I said, the men and women with color, that I couldn't have done any of it without their expertise and their generosity. Please, if